وقل اعملوا فسيرى الله عملكم ورسوله والمؤمنون وستردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. صدق الله العظيم. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Translation Competence and Translator Training. Actually, this is our second webinar organized by the Department of Translation and Interpreting Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in this semester, in this academic year. So on behalf of Hamad bin Khalifa University, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, on behalf of our Dean, Dr. Amal al-Maliki, on behalf of my colleagues in the Department of Translation and Interpreting Studies, and on behalf of our perfect MA and PhD students, I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar. And first, let me seize this opportunity to thank you all, our dear attendees, our dear speakers, for joining us, for making this possible, for making this a reality. Actually, it is a reality because in a minute, we're gonna be discussing, discoursing on, and trying to find answers to the questions that we might have in our minds right now on one of the most important topics in the field of translation studies, which is translation competence and its relation with translator training. In this webinar, we'll try our hands to find answers, actually to find full and precise answers instead of the dusty answers that we might have in our minds right now to questions such as, what is translation competence? How would you define translation competence? What are the main components of translation competence? What is the difference between translation competence and translation skills? What is the difference between translation competence on the one hand and linguistic competence and bilingual competence on the other? Is translation competence teachable? Can we teach translation competence? Is it measurable? Can it be assessed? Can it be developed? Here I'm talking about translation competence. Is it knowledge-centered? Is it practice-centered? And what is the relationship between translation competence and translator training? What is the relationship between digital literacy and translation competence? Is the use of technologies still part of translation competence, or it is a competence on its own? So all these questions and more will be discussed by our distinguished speakers. And before setting the wheels in motion, let me just remind you of a couple of things. First, the attendees, we will open the floor for questions after we finish our discussion. So you can post your question at any time during the webinar by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It leaps to the eye, you'll not miss it, I'm sure. Second, the speakers, try to make sure to mute yourself if it is not your turn, and unmute yourself if it is yours. Now, let's make a start. Let me start with Dr. Alia Rubai. And let me introduce her before asking her. Dr. Alia Rubai is a full professor of linguistics and translation in the Department of Translation, College of Languages, University of Dhaka, Iraq. She has been teaching linguistics and translation for many years at different universities. Her MA thesis was about the principles and problems of simultaneous interpreting, with a special reference to English and Arabic. And her PhD dissertation, published 2005 in the UK by Durham Modern Languages Series at Durham University, was about translation criticism, a model for assessing narrative fictional text. She also translated with me, your moderator, Ali Manna, a collection of short stories titled Modern Iraqi Short Stories in 2009. In addition to that, she has published a great number of articles in well-known journals, such as Bible, Across Languages and Cultures, to mention but a few. Further, she has supervised many MA and PhD students in the field of translation at different universities. So please join me to welcome Dr. Arway. Dr. Alia, my question is, how would you define translation competence? This is the first part of my own question. And the second part is, what is the difference, if any, between translation competence on the one hand and linguistic competence and bilingual competence on the other? So could you please share your thoughts with us? Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. I would like to thank you for the opportunity, and it is actually an honor to be with you and all the dear colleagues. With regard to your question as what a translation competence is, let me first talk about the term competence, because it is not the only field where competence is used. It is used in many other disciplines. And one such discipline is translation, of course. So it is like the very term of competence. You have a combination of abilities, skills, and knowledge, which is manifested in specific actions and situations. And the very concept of competence is multidimensional in nature. It includes a number of components. So you have, for example, the personal component, where you have knowledge, we have cognitive skills, we have motivations, attitudes, and emotions. And there is also the sociocultural component, how you understand the context of situation from the sociocultural point of view. And the other subcomponent is behavior, like the actions of the participants, their conducts, their initiatives. So the concept of competence, it is like a specialized system of abilities or skills that are necessary to reach at a specific action. Now, if we come to translation, starting from like the 90s, the field of translation studies has become interdisciplinary in nature, addressing such disciplines like discourse analysis, text linguistics, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, cultural studies, and information technology. Before that, the focus was on the linguistic aspect, and here comes what we call linguistic competence. By linguistic competence, we mean a system of linguistic knowledge by someone who is supposed to be a native speaker of language, or someone who has a native-like knowledge of the language. So linguistic competence is part of a translation competence, but it is not equal to translation competence. Translation competence is much more broader than that. It does not only include the linguistic knowledge where you have to understand and analyze the text of the source language in order to be able to transfer it to the target language. You have to have also extra linguistic sub-competence, where there is a knowledge of the facts. They call it declarative knowledge, like a knowledge of the world. They call it also encyclopedic knowledge. And you have also to have procedural knowledge. What kind of procedures do you apply when you undertake the translation process? What strategy and the strategic competence as well. These are all sub-competences under the broader term of a translation competence. So the concept of strategy is important when you have a problem in translation. What kind of actions does the translator or interpreter adopt in order to solve a certain problem? You have also like operative knowledge. You have also like it's not you all the time worried about how the information is conveyed from one language into another. Sometimes the very situation involves some sort of adaptation in order to convey the message to the target language reader or target language listener. So what kind of adaptation is that? How does it operate? What are the constraints under which the translator acts in order to like take such decisive decisions as deleting, for example, as inserting some piece of information? Sometimes the translator maneuvers because his ideology is different from the ideology of the source language writer or speaker. We have a number of sub-competences under the general term of a translation competence. And as I said, linguistic competence is just one component of these sub-competences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alia, for this full and precise answer. Now let me move to Dr. Jamal. Dr. Jamal, what do you think of what has been said by Dr. Alia? Could you please elaborate on the main elements of translation competence? It seems that we talk about translation competence that has certain elements, that has certain components. So in your own opinion, what are the main elements? What are the main components of translation competence? So could you share your own thoughts with us? But before answering that question, let me introduce you, Dr. Jamal. Actually, Dr. Jamal is a full professor of translation studies at Wargla University in Algeria. He is a translator and a conference interpreter with 3 main languages. Imagine. Arabic, French, and English. He is the director of the MA Translation Department at the Faculty of Letters and Languages at Wargla University in Algeria. He is also a visiting professor at EU and AU institutions of translation. He has published many articles in well-known journals and 2 chapters in 2 edited volumes published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing in 2017 and 2020. And he has supervised many MA and PhD theses in Algeria and overseas. So please join me to welcome Dr. Jamal. Dr. Jamal, back to you. Could you please share your thoughts with us concerning the main components of translation competence? Go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Ali. Thanks so much, all of you, for the invitation, for the warm welcome, and for everything. So regarding the question you raised, I think I need to go a little bit backwards. If you say that it's worth it to be mentioned, let me define a translation. So translation from linguistic perspective is, I consider it a change in the form. What do I mean by change in a form? Just to make difference between one language studies and translation studies, or translational and translatorial studies. What is meant by a change in a form? If I say, for instance, this person was translated before the judge, this does not mean that he was translated, that is to say he was French, then translated into English or Arabic. And if I say translating words into actions, it means that they were just words and turned into actions. So translation means that it involves indeed like a change in the form at large. This is linguistically speaking. But technically speaking, translation has to do what was called by Roman Jacobson the interlingual translation or translation proper, consists of moving at least between 2 linguistic systems, that is to say Arabic and English, for instance, French and and Arabic, Spanish and Italian, 2 linguistic systems at least. So here we are speaking about translation competence. So to be able, I think, to translate, one should show many competencies. And I'm saying to be able to translate, it means to translate successfully, not only finish in translation. So to translate successfully, there is to say to move from one language into another one, let's say generating the same effect of the source language, generating, let's say, the same load, the same, sometimes let me call them even charges, between the first language and the second one, source language and the target language. You need to enjoy, let's say, some competencies, which are not limited to the following. I would say the first one is linguistic competence. So there is no chance for you to translate if you don't at least master the 2 linguistic systems at least, or 3 linguistic systems at least, to be able to move from 1A to B. So this is the linguistic competence. So you need first to master both languages to be able to move at ease between A and B. The other one, one of the other competences, I'd say the extra linguistic component as well, or the extra linguistic competence, which has to do mainly with the term culture. That is to say, you have to be a little bit aware of the culture you're translating from, or the culture you're translating into, to enable managing the discourse or the text perfectly with precision. This is one of the other competencies as well. I might mention as well the, let me call it the strategic competence. And here, I think the strategic competence, it has to do much more with what we call in translation studies manipulation, how to place this word instead of this other word, your choice, your selection of words or likely terms, and studying and measuring their effect. So if you put this word, it produces this effect. If you put this other word, it would produce this other effect. And likely we may call it a strategic competence. One of the, let's say, the other components, I would call it a psycho or physiological competence, which is you have to be able at least to have the attitude of dealing and reacting and responding, let's say, to the discourse immediately. And this is needed mostly in, not only in translation, which is a general term that includes interpreting as well, but mainly in interpreting practices. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal, for your clarification. Actually, this leads us to another important question, which is the translation competence teachable? Can we teach translation competence? If yes, to what extent? Is it knowledge-centered or practice-centered? So let me ask Dr. Shabnam. Dr. Shabnam, are you with us?
Yes. Do you have me?
So, yeah, before answering, please, let me introduce you, please. Dr. Shabnam Saadat holds a PhD in Translation and Intercultural Studies from the University of Manchester in the UK. In addition to giving translation tutorials at the University of Manchester and Queen's University Belfast, she is a literary translator and has published many book-length translations. She is interested in sociology of translation, critical discourse analysis, in particular, hegemonic and counter-hegemonic discourses in translation. She is also interested in collaborative translation and translation in cyberspace. So please join me to welcome Dr. Shabnam. Again, I will repeat the same question if you want me to repeat. So is a translation competence teachable? Can we teach a translation competence? If yes, to what extent? And the second part of the question, is it knowledge-centered or practice-centered? Please go ahead. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Ali. You know, before starting, I want to mention this question. It has always been asked because I'm from both domain. I mean, as an academic, as a professional translator, and I have been in both parts. And I see that, for example, we see so many translators that they don't have a degree in translation studies, but they do translations, and they think that education is not necessary. They learn by practice. But on the other hand, we have this academic side that they think that it is necessary. Let me just give you just simplify that, because it is like other professions, like a shoemaker, like a tailor. It takes mentors teaching apprentices. So we cannot say that it's a practice that you can develop it, improve it by yourself. You need it. Education is the basic part, and translation competence is actually the knowledge underlying performance. So it includes at least linguistic knowledge, cultural knowledge, domain-specific knowledge, and technical knowledge. I mean, by technical knowledge, I mean that the ability to do documenting, research, use of dictionary, etc., etc. And all these do not necessarily need to be practiced separately, but may be incorporated in practical translation classes. In fact, translation competence includes skills, expertise, and judgment that professional translator develops from a combination of theoretical training and practice experience. So we cannot say that we just need a degree, theoretical training, knowing theories. You know, in undergraduate programs, we don't have so many theoretical part. Main focus, from my experience, main focus is on practical translation and trying to convey the concepts through practice. But in postgraduate, we introduce theories and different parts. So there are some differences between programs if it is undergraduate or postgraduate. But in general, we can say that translators' judgment and all this competence develops from a combination of both theories and practice. And translation education is necessary in the process of acquiring and developing translation competence. And we have this common view that translation is a skill developed naturally by bilinguals. Most of us heard it. But bilingualism is actually the basic ingredient of translation competence. Language skills, yes, they must be honed to perfection, but in a way that the students do not focus entirely on language only. This must be incorporated into the course or the whole training program together with a wide range of other abilities translators are required to possess. But to what extent? The fact is that translation graduates may show varying levels of translation competence. There are stages of translation competence, and translators never reach an absolute level of knowledge. So it's a porous concept, and it is a mix of conscious and subconscious processes, and it differs from person to person. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shabnam, for this clarification and precise answer. Now, let me move to Dr. Zagout. Let me introduce Dr. Muhammad Zagout before asking him. Dr. Zagout is Assistant Professor of Contrastive Linguistics and Translation Studies at United Arab Emirates, where he teaches different courses in the field of translation studies. Dr. Mohammed Zagoud holds 2 masters, one in translation and interpreting studies from Libya, and another one in applied linguistics for TESOL from the UK. He also has a PhD in translation studies from Durham University. And since 2012, Dr. Zagoud has participated in a number of international conferences and published several articles in various journals and conference proceedings, in addition to publishing some translated works. He is the co-translator with Fred Bragnall of a collection of Libyan short stories by Ali Jaki, titled Amutu Kulla Yawmin, I Die Every Day. So please join me to welcome Dr. Mohammed Zagoud. Dr. Mohammed, as you know, the process of translation at its macro level, when we concentrate on the work achieved by the translator, when we concentrate on the actual act of translating, is divided into 3 main stages: pre-translation, translation, and post-translation. Of course, some other scholars use different terms to refer to these stages, such as analysis, translation, and revision, or source text comprehension, target text production, and revision. So whatever they call them, my question is, as a translation teacher, Dr. Mohammed, how would you make use of this framework of translation methodology, including the 3 stages, to develop translation competence? Here, we assume that translation competence can be developed. And this is another question that I would like to bring to the table, but not now. Now, let's concentrate on this question, Dr. Mohammed, related to the 3 stages and the translation competence. So could you please share your thoughts with us?
Thank you, Prof. Ali, for this introduction and for the invitation as well. I would extend my thanks to the colleagues who shared their experience, knowledge, especially in teaching. Well, yes, Dr. Ali, in addition to the types of competencies that our colleagues have spoken about, in terms of the linguistic competence, the cultural competence, we have the translation competence. And in my view, that the translation competence is represented in the translation methodology framework that our students are supposed to use, to adopt whenever they do translation, irrespective of the languages they deal with, whether they are translating like from English into Arabic, Arabic to English, German to French, French to English, whatever languages they deal with. And of course, irrespective of the text types that they are translating, whether they are translating legal texts, political, medical, whatever. This translation methodology framework is summarized in 3 main steps or stages. The first stage or the first step is what we describe as a pre-translating step. And this step is what we have to do as translators before we start translating the text. Many scholars call this step a source text comprehension. In the source text comprehension step, we have to do 2 different types of analysis. Of course, we have to read the text several times and do 2 different types of analysis. They are macro analysis and micro analysis. Other scholars call them extra-textual analysis and intratextual analysis. Of course, in doing the extra-textual analysis or the macro analysis, we have to identify different elements related to the text, including, for example, the format, the text subject, the writer's intention or the communicative function, the audience, the tone, the text type, etc. And then we move to do the micro-analysis or intratextual analysis. And here we have to identify different elements, including the types of words used by the source text writer, the types of sentences, the punctuation marks, the stylistic features, etc. Once we do these two different types of analysis, we would comprehend the source text. And then we move to the second step, which is the actual act of translating. Many scholars describe it as target text production. And here we need to divide the text into units, translation units. And we all know that a translation unit, by definition, is the smallest meaningful stretch of language. And this unit has to be translated as one unit altogether, of course, by using appropriate translation techniques. There are many translation techniques or strategies that one could use in order to transfer these units to the target language. So what we have to do here is to adopt or use appropriate translation techniques and transfer the source text into the target language unit by unit. Of course, we cannot, or we don't have to stick with using only one technique all the time, but depends on the type of the unit, we use the appropriate translation technique. And sometimes we use 2 or 3 different techniques to translate one unit into the target language. Once we use these translation techniques and transferred the text, the source text, into the target language, we move to the third step, and this is the last step or the final step in the translation process. And we call that, or we describe this step as the post-translating step. And many scholars name it as translation revision. In translation revision, we have to follow a number of procedures. First of all, we have to compare the target text or the translation that we produced in the previous step with the source text in order to make sure that we have transferred the words, the sentences, the meaning of the text into the target language. Then we leave the source text aside and only read the target text that we produced in order to make sure that it's linguistically correct, culturally acceptable, and the language is clear, free from any ambiguous or unnatural structures in the target language. And then we move to the last procedure here, and we read the target text again separately away from the source language in order to make sure of any stylistic, for example, changes that lead to the smoothness and clarity of the target text. So by doing this, or following these 3 steps together, we guarantee to a certain limit that we produced a well-translated text in the target language, and we achieve the competence that we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad, for your detailed answer and also for sharing your thoughts with us. Let me capitalize on what you have already said, Dr. Muhammad, and let me ask Dr. Asma this general question. Dr. Asma, as a translation teacher, as a translation trainer, in your opinion, in your view, what are the essential tools that translation trainees or translators can benefit from? And are they, I'm talking about those tools, are they part of translation competence? Are those tools that we normally rely on while teaching or translating part of translation competence or no? So what do you think? And before answering, let me introduce you, please, Dr. Asma. Dr. Asma Aqnair is Assistant Professor of Translation Studies at Al-Qasim University in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Asma holds a master's degree in Arabic English Translation and Interpreting from Durham University and a PhD from the same university, Durham University in the UK, in Translation Studies. She has participated in and attended several national and international conferences concerning translation studies and corpus linguistics. She's the author of Domesticating Saudi Arabia, News, Trans-Editing, Representations, and Power Negotiation, a Routledge edited volume titled Translation as a Set of Frames, edited by me, Alan Manna, and my colleague, John Long Go, 2021, just 2 months ago. So please join me to welcome Dr. Asma. Dr. Asma, back to you. Could you please share your thoughts with us regarding my question, or shall I repeat the question?
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you, Dr. Ali, for having me here today, and also thank the organizing committee for inviting me to talk about a very relevant topic, actually, which is translation competence. And also, I think this is a great time for us all to sit down and actually reflect on the shift that has been enforced by COVID-19 on and how this has changed the way we teach, train, practice translation. So I think this is very, very relevant topic, and I'm very happy and honored to be part of this event. Thank you. So to answer your question, Dr. Ali, we need to really look at what are we dealing with as translators or translation trainees. Now, as Dr. Zagoud mentioned a little bit earlier, we are trying to transfer meaning when we translate. So basically, we are trying to decode this meaning, understand it, and then basically encode it and transfer it into the target language. And this meaning is not carried on words only. Rather, it is carried on, it can be carried on words, syntactic structures, and even stylistic markers sometimes. So for us to be able to talk about the tools that we need to use as translators, or the tools that we need to teach our students how to use, we need to know what are we dealing with. So basically, we are dealing with meaning. And as I said, this meaning does not rely on words, so we cannot restrict ourselves to let's say, dictionaries only. We need to have other tools, such as, so obviously we need the monolingual and bilingual dictionaries, but also we can make use of other tools, such as corpora. And corpora is an excellent tool to incorporate in our teaching, to teach our students how to consult corpus, a certain corpus for collocations. To consult corpus for frequencies. For example, if we, let's say, have the word hijab in English, in Arabic, and we're trying to translate it into English, one would assume or rely on hunches that the word can be translated into the English word hijab, but we don't have the statistic figure that proves this. But when we rely on corpus to consult, we'll be able to see the exact frequency of such word in the target language. So I think the essential tools at this age are obviously monolingual dictionaries, and I keep on emphasizing monolingual dictionaries because we need to know the meaning of the term that we're trying to translate into the target language in its own language. For example, the term record, if we look it up in a bilingual dictionary, we will see the most common equivalents in the target language But if we look it up in a monolingual dictionary, English dictionary, we'll be able to see that it has 7 different meanings as a noun and 5 different meanings as a verb, which is very important for translators and translation trainees to understand. So sometimes our students forget to consult the monolingual dictionaries, and I keep reminding my students that it is very important to consult these dictionaries. Again, we need to also think of CAT tools as one of the essential tools that our students need to be familiar with at this age. They need to be able to know how to use them if we are actually trying to prepare them for the work field. Because this is the reality of translation practice. We're not trying to teach them the basic, let's say, element of a competence, which is the linguistic competence. The assumption is when we are training translators, they have a certain level of linguistic competence to start with. So we are trying to look at the higher levels of competencies that my colleagues just mentioned. For example, the cultural competence. We are trying to develop their skills, the methodologies that they are using in their translations, and also the tools. We're trying to help them acquire the knowledge of how to use the tools that are actually used in the workplace. So that's to answer your question, Dr. Ali, about the essential tools at this age.
Thank you.
When it comes to
Thank you, Dr. Prisma. Thanks a lot for this clarification and also for sharing your thoughts with us. Now, I reckon we need to link the main components of our title, Translation Competence and Translator Training, by raising that question. Is there any relationship between them? If yes, what is the relationship between them? Let me ask Ms. Raya about such a relationship. So what do you think, Ms. Raya, according to your own experience in teaching translation for many years? And before answering this question, let me introduce you, Ms. Raya. Ms. Raya Nasser Al-Rujaybi is a lecturer at Sohar University in Oman. She has an MA in Translation Studies from Leicester University, UK, and she is currently a PhD candidate at the International Islamic University in Malaysia, where she is focusing on the ideological and linguistic constraints in the translation of animated cartoon from English to Arabic. Ms. Raya has been teaching translation courses such as video translation, contrastive grammar, introduction to translation, and advanced translation, in addition to supervising final year projects for many years. So please join me to welcome Ms. Raya. Ms. Raya, back to you. What do you think? Is there any relationship between translation competence and translator training?
First, let me thank you, Dr. Ali, and special thank for Hamad bin Khalifa University, and another special thanks for those who organized this event and giving me a chance to be part of this event. Going back to your question, let's say training or translator training will I can say there is really there is a strong relationship between translator training and translation competence. That the translator training will provide that skilled and qualified professional translator. So within training, so the training itself, that is it's associated with linguistic skills. language skills, and these which are required or these skills are required to produce or create an acceptable translation. So this acceptable translation is the translation competence. So the acquisition of this translation competence is actually it is a combination of practices and instructions. So so yes, the professional translators they should insist in such training as so the translators will acquire different interpersonal skills and attitudes, which is this we can call this as the translator competence. So so they will acquire this language skills, which is very important for the translators, and let me say it is the main competence that the translator needs to be knowledgeable about the language aspects of the both languages, the source language and the target language. If the translator will not have this language competence, so it means that he will have that challenge when translate from the source text into the target text. So the translator himself or herself needs not just to know not just to know about just or one rank of regarding the target language, but for he needs to master different ranks like subject line, lexical rank, phrasal, clausal, and discourse as well. So yes, as I said, there is a strong relationship between the translator training and translation competence.
Thank you, Ms. Raya, for sharing your thoughts with us. And you try to emphasize that, yes, there is a strong relationship between translation competence, because we have already mentioned, and my colleagues have already mentioned, that translation competence covers a lot of sub-competences, and the most important one is the linguistic competence. And when we talk about the linguistic competence, we talk about 8 skills, because we have 4 skills in the source language and 4 skills in the target language. But you said it is not enough to concentrate on the linguistic competence, but we need to move also to concentrate on other sub-competences. Thank you very much for your clarification. With us also Fatima Ahmed. And Fatima Ahmed is one of our perfect MA students at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Fatima, can you hear me? Could you please tell us about your department, which is my own department too? And could you tell us about the programs that you have and the courses that you have studied thus far? And then you can move to talk about the great skills and hands-on experiences that you have gained during your study. So please share your thoughts with us, and the mic is yours. Go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Ali. Is my voice clear?
Yes.
I would like to start by thanking Dr. Ali for introducing me in such a lovely way and for inviting me to be present and also to give some of my experience and talk about my experience. So, and also the conversation itself is quite interesting to me because as a student, I am a translator in making. So all the points that the speakers have raised are things that as a student that I even think about. So to start, I am a second-year MA student at Translation and Interpreting Institute at HBKU. The department, TII, an Interpreting Institute, currently offers 2 MA programs.
Sorry to interrupt you, Fatma.
Yes.
Try to avoid the abbreviations. Try to mention the full name.
Okay.
So when you say TII, what do you mean by this?
The Translation and Interpreting Institute currently offers 2 master's program. One of them is Masters in Translation Studies, and the other one is Masters in Audiovisual Translation. I am pursuing a Master's in Audiovisual Translation. And my choice of the program came from my belief that this is a very unique program for many reasons. One, audiovisual translation is a field that is taught. There aren't a lot of programs that address this in at least the Middle East. And I also found it very unique that we get to learn about different modalities in audiovisual translation, but we also incorporate accessibility. For example, STH or subtitling for deaf and hard of hearing, and audio description for blind or visually impaired. This was one of the things that that excited me to join this program. And the third very important thing about this program that is absolutely the best thing that happened to us is that we get to not only practice translation in class, but also we are involved in real life projects. For example, in our internship, we were working with a website called Learn Autism, where me and my colleagues had to subtitle about 63 videos, all informative about autism. So in a way, we hope that we kind of put some good information out there for the Arabic audience regarding autism. And currently in our intersensory translation, we are working with Ajial Film Festival in providing them with the subtitling for deaf and hard of hearing and audio description. So we get to practice or have a very rich experience when it comes to learning translation that has the theory in it and also practice, not only in class, but real life. Now, about my experience in the last 2 years, Dr. Asma, I believe, she mentioned something that is very important to note, is that the last 2 years was or were very different for everyone because of the new world that we were living in due to the COVID pandemic. So I believe we all had to learn new things and to do the things that we are used to do, but in a different way. For you all teachers, you had to learn how to teach online, to turn the whole syllabus into something that the students can follow, but online. I had to learn, as a student, I had to learn how to learn online. But at the same time, I think we kind of learned how to turn that into a positive experience by having these kind of conversations where each one of us is sitting in their home, but we're still sharing knowledge. I would say that the experience that I had consisted of 3 things or 3 stages. One, that I get to know myself as an individual, and when you know yourself, I believe, when you know yourself well, you also know how to be a good translator. And I would say this was done through the conversations that we had, and those conversations are quite similar to what we just had. Is if we are talking about theory, for example, why do a student think that this theory is going to be best suited for this kind of text? and how do you even classify texts and so on. So that was quite an experience, and the confidence that it gives you when you are allowed to speak and to share your opinion. It's quite a big thing, because translation in general is a quite decision-making process. You have to decide at every step what you're doing, what meaning are you going for. And I have noticed that most of the meaning of the word meaning that we have discussed in this webinar was related to written words. But because I come from audiovisual translation, for us meaning goes beyond that. You have the sound, you have the music, the body language, and it's just a different world and far more complex. But I would say that regardless of the challenges, the Hamad bin Khalifa University and my department were able to make the learning process a very fruitful one, both as a translator and also on a personal level as a human being. So I'm very happy to be at HBKU or Hamad bin Khalifa University. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And translation competence, back to the first part of our title. Translation competence in the field of translation studies has been approached from different perspectives by different scholars and groups. But the most important definition was proposed by PACTA research group. PACTA stands for Process in the Acquisition of Translation Competence and Evaluation. Have you ever heard of this group? Have you ever come across this research group? I'm sure yes. To cut it short, because it is one of the most important research group that in which the term translation competence has been defined and classified and so on. So who wants to tell us more about this research group?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please, Dr. Ali, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali. Before talking about this group, I think that this group's work is somehow inspired by what is now known as complexity thinking in translation theory. Complexity thinking appeared in the pure sciences, but then it was applied to social sciences as well. What are the implications of complexity thinking to translation theory? It is that translation is not like an either-or process. So when we have this argument, is it like sense for sense or literal as word for word? This argument, is it communicative or is it semantic? Is it domestication or foreignization? The other implication is that the process of translation is not linear, as if you are going just in one direction from the source to the target. And there are few, if any, predictability in translation. So complexity thinking views translation as a complex process that has interrelated elements. It also objects to viewing the translation like moving from the cultural perspective, from the linguistic perspective, then in the 90s to the cultural perspective, then to the social psychological perspective. And we have like identifying different terms in translation, in the development of the concept of translation. So we see all these elements as being interactive and interrelated. So this group, PACTA group, is somehow their work and their definition of a translation, as if it is inspired by this complexity thinking in translation theory. And another theory which I find mirrored in this definition as well is the variational theory. It was drafted in China in the 1998, but then it was published in 2002. it looks at translation, like there is what is called complete translation and what is a translation with adaptation, where the room is open for, you find that in actual translation practice, translators add, delete, edit, narrate, condense, integrate, alter things, because a host of factors are being involved in the process. These interactive factors compel the translator sometimes to embrace such changes. Either it is the translator's ideology himself or the institution for which the translator is working, or the host of the other agents that are invisible but have their say in the final product, like the translation commissioner, the translation editor, and so on and so forth. So back to this group, it was established in 1997. The aim was to unify the pedagogical criteria for translation training and translation acquisition, and define translation competence in the same way as the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages of the European Union. They kind of gave a general description for competence in languages, and this general definition and description can be like applied to any language. What is good about this endeavor by this group is that the founding members are all translators or translator teachers who train professional translators. And the other good thing about it is that it was empirical and experimental. They approached translation from both the qualitative and the quantitative point of view. So it was a mixed method approach to translation competence. And the other good thing about it is that under this definition, you can host many arguments with regard to the nature of a translation competence. Translation competence definitions, they tend to be like reductionist in nature, in the sense that some concentrate on equivalence, others concentrate on transfer. So many arguments, and you find that the definition is sort of scattered here and there. But this group has managed to put an all-inclusive definition for translation. So they define it like the underlying system of knowledge and the skills needed to be able to translate. So it is an underlying system of knowledge and the skills. You see, here we can host a number of arguments. It is not like following a certain school of thought with regard to the nature of this language, of this knowledge and what the skills are involved. But this is not the only definition. There are other 4 statements that complete the definition. They include the actualization of translation competence is different depending on the situation. And this is what I meant when I said that there are ideologies behind how the translation competence is actualized. So it is not just one school of thought. There are so many factors that are at work when you actually do the practice of translation. The other thing is that it constitutes operative knowledge. You know that translators' knowledge is never static, it is dynamic. You keep on acquiring knowledge in the process of performing translation. The other concept is that strategies have significant roles in translation competence. You know that translators adopt different strategies in coping with translation problems. Again, depending on the situation in question. And the last thing is that most of the processes are automatic because it is a kind of expert knowledge. So translation competence is a kind of expert knowledge. So this expert knowledge, not all bilinguals have the knowledge, and it's not necessary that any bilingual can be a translator, because when it comes to translation, the concept of expert knowledge is involved. And yes, and it is basically procedural rather than declarative. And one last thing, probably I'm taking more time than I should, but you mentioned something about competence and competency and the difference between them. We know with competence, we talk about the ability. With competency, we talk about the skill, the performing of this ability. Sorry for taking much time.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Dr.
thank you
Alia.
very much.
And I think this is what you have already mentioned, that translation competence is different from bilingual competence. Now, also, you have already touched on that. Thanks a lot for your full and precise answer. Now, let's move to talk about our courses. Let's talk about our translation courses. Dr. Jamal, could you please touch on the objectives and learning outcomes of your courses, your translation courses, such as legal translation, media translation, literature translation, technical translation, business translation, and the like. And to make what I have in my mind clear, let me raise this question. Do you think they are well designed? Here I'm talking about the objectives and learning outcomes of our courses. Do you think that they are well designed to make competent and professional translators? So basically, here we try to link our students' needs, the objectives of and learning outcomes of our courses to translation competence. So, Dr. Jamal, what do you think?
Okay, so thanks so much. Indeed, we have plenty of translation programs around the, let's say, around the Arab world and around the globe. But sometimes I notice that each program is having its different objectives. That is to say that the programs are not all having the same objectives. So I may not say that, or I will not dare saying that the programs or the syllabi or curricula are not well designed. But I would say that from time to time, we need to review them. From time to time, we need to update them to meet new needs or new, let's say, market needs and new, let's say, requirements by the student or by the practitioners or by the clients as well. So I may not generalize saying that they are not well designed, because there is always behind a program or another one, a group or a team of teachers, professors, working hard, deploying all efforts to enable this program seeing light. So we cannot say that and generalize saying the fact that they're not well designed. But most of them are, let's say, meeting at least the minimum requirement, enabling, let's say, the student at least to be, let me say, novice translator. Because I think in translation department or translation programs, we cannot teach everything to the student. We cannot give them everything, but we just give them guidelines to be on the right path, guidelines to, let's say, enable them following the right path. And it's up to them after that to start, let's say, making research or working in a position enabling them to get promoted to another one. And that is to say, in a translation program, we cannot assure that the program forms a competent translator from the first glance. And if speaking about translation programs and curricula and syllabi, I think it's worth to mention that we might have, let's say, at least 3 panes in a translation program. The first one is purely linked to translation studies, theories, theorizing to translation, and so on. The second one, I think, is linked to translation, which is the written form of rendition. And the third one is linked to interpreting. So training an interpreter is completely different from training a translator. And training an interpreter or a translator is completely different, of course, from training, let's say, a person who might be specialized and an expert in translation studies. So the curricula themselves are different from each other. The objectives are themselves as well different from each other, depending on the need expected. And if I take translation exclusively, translation itself, most, let's say, Arab countries do not teach specialized translation. And I'm saying most, they say translation program. And this translator or translation student, we expect them all the time, let's say, to know the all abouts of translation, which is, I think, impossible. So you might be, or you should be specialized, whether, for instance, in legal translation or medical translation or financial translation or so on. And the drawback in this one is that sometimes when you are specialized in medical translation, the problem is that at the very end, you won't find a job fit in medical translation. And if you find a job, let's say, in medical translation, you are excluded from it, although you're having a degree in translation. So being specialized is a good thing, but sometimes it prevents you from having a good job in the right time. All in all, I would say that the programs and the curricula designed, let's say, are efforts of professors, group of teachers, so you cannot dare and say that they are not good ones, but they need to, from time to time, to be reviewed. They need from time to time to be updated to meet a new requirement, to meet new needs, and to meet, let's say, the new needs of the market and the new circumstances of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal, for sharing your experience as a director of the MA program at your university, Wagla University. And back to the issue raised earlier, if you remember, when we assumed that translation competence can be developed. And I would like to ask Dr. Shabnam about this. Dr. Shabnam, can translation competence be developed? If yes, how can it be assessed then?
Okay. Actually, the early manifestation of translation competence is linguistic competence that my colleagues mentioned earlier. And the development of translation competence consists of three processes. First is acquisition of previously non-existent competence, what we teach in the courses to students. And second is the restructuring of already existing competence, what the students have, but we help them to redirect, restructure their competence and put it in good use. And the third one is the acquisition of a strategic competence, which is actually a procedural knowledge and where the strategies play a very important role. Let's say it's the process of decision making, and each translation trainee should be approached because students are different. They are not at the same level of competence, and they think differently. So each translation trainee should be approached individually, and their needs should be taken into consideration in the process of arranging and conducting translation course. But in general, we can say that it includes reading relevant materials, comparing and studying translations, compiling glossaries, improving search competence, and digital literacy. But about the assessment of translation, in different programs, more or less the main component, it relies on performance, and it can be scored on the basis of test takers' performance on particular set of translated segments. But what differs maybe in different universities is the way they are scoring, and it's not actually like mathematics that there is just one correct answer and it's not objective, it's subjective. So I think I had experience teaching back in Iran at Alama University at both undergraduate and postgraduate at University of Manchester. The way of grading is different. So I think as we had it at the University of Manchester, the process took 2 graders actually to be more fair, because the process is actually subjective. We cannot say that this is correct, this is accurate, this is inaccurate. We have a spectrum of accuracy, and to be fair to the students, it takes 2 graders. In postgraduate, because students acquire some theoretical knowledge as well, it can accompany a report. So the grading is from out of 100, and 50 of the grading is on the report the students write. If it is a single text, a single long text that they are translating to show their performance. So in the report they write why this text is selected, the characteristics of the text, the challenges they faced, and the way, the strategies they apply to sort out the challenges. This sort of report, so it shows the knowledge they acquired and how conscious the choices they made is, and how it relies on the theoretical knowledge acquired through the training. And the second part is actual translation, that we have the text. We use actually some sort of more technical tools, the online system that they have devised. There are labels for words, so we don't say that this is accurate, this is inaccurate, but there are 1 to 7 categories of labeling. If it is acceptable, if it is partly has some flaws, if it can be better. So 2 graders, each of them independently grade the text, and then there is a list. According to that, they just add up to find out how what is the grade of the student. So, but there is actually, it's not, as I said, it's not like mathematics, but it can be assessed somehow, not objective, not totally subjective, but something in between.
Thank you, Dr. Shabnam, about that. And actually, this is in line with Quine and his theory, indeterminacy theory, when he touched on that issue in his well-known book titled Book and Object, Word and Object, 1960, when he said, when we ask people to translate a text, and then we will not have one text. And when we ask them to back translate, we will not have the source text. Why? Because we are different. People are different. Thanks a lot for your own answer and precise answer. Actually, Dr. Zagood, Dr. Muhammad Zagood, back to you again. You know, Dr. Muhammad, in the past, we used to talk about the use of technologies as an essential part of translation competence, okay, or to be more accurate, as an essential part of research competence, which is one of the sub-competences. But these days, due to the heavy use of technologies while teaching and translating, can we consider the use of technologies as an essential part of translation competence, or it is a competence on its own? What do you think?
Thank you, Dr. Ali, again. As Dr. Asma Al-Qunayir mentioned a bit before, that nowadays we use technology a lot, and there are many tools that translators are supposed to use in order to do their tasks. And as you mentioned, Dr. Ali, due to the heavy load of work done by translators every day, nowadays, back to your question, I consider that technological competence is a part of translation competence as far as translation tools are concerned. So translators nowadays use like electronic dictionaries a lot. Instead of carrying like paper dictionaries along with us, we only carry our mobile phones, and we have applications nowadays. In addition to the use of CAT tools nowadays, in order to translate like smoothly, for the sake of consistency, we use like computer-assisted translation tools like MemoQ, Dejavu, Tradus, for example, etc. We also use machine translation. There are many like softwares and applications. To mention but an example, Google Translate, for example. We always use Google Translate in order to help us do our tasks. It's being said that scientifically speaking, a human translator is able to translate no more than 20,000 words per day, whereas like Google Translate, for example, can translate hundreds of pages per day. However, we need to remember all the times that there are pros and cons for the use of technology. If we talk about the advantages of using technology, for example, one could summarize them in in the time, as I've just mentioned, that we can, for example, translate thousands of words in a few minutes if we are using technology. We are using Google Translate, for example, but we can just translate no more than 20,000 words if we are translating manually. So this is in terms of time. Also the cost. If we need to translate, for example, a book, and we need to achieve this within a few limited time, for example, we might need several translators working together, which means that we are paying some translators, a number of translators. Instead, if we are using like machine translation, for example, it doesn't cost a lot. What we need is our computer, internet, Google Translate, and we just, by one click, we get a translated text in the target language. Also adaptation, for example. Machine translation is adaptable to different languages. This means that as a translator, using Google Translate, for example, we can translate from English into Arabic, from French to Arabic, from Italian to Arabic, and so on and so forth. But it's rarely possible to find a human translator who can translate from different languages at the same time. We might get, for example, we might find, for example, a translator who translates from 2 or 3 different languages, but not more than that. Another one is confidentiality. Again, if you are using machine translation, for example, the information that you translate or the text that you are translating is going to be confidential, because no one looks at the text, the source text or the target text, unless you and your machine, for example. While human translators, for example, if it's a large document, you need to send it to different translators and so on and so forth. So it's not going to be confidential. So these are some like advantages of machine translation. If we look at the other side, we might look at some disadvantages as well. One of them is the accuracy. As we know that machines do not have the thinking abilities as human beings, and accordingly, they might not be able to translate some types of texts or some structures or some expressions, especially when it comes to idiomatic expressions, to sentences that have like connotative meanings rather than denotative ones, etc. So machine translation, for example, is not accurate compared to a human translation. Another one is the time. We have already mentioned that time is one of the advantages. But again, once we produce the text that's translated by a machine, it needs a long time to be edited. As we all know that the machine translation needs to be edited by a human translator, by a human editor, a linguist. So this might need time that's longer than the time of translating the text itself. So we are spending much time in editing, maybe more than the time we spend if we are translating the text manually.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thanks a lot.
You are welcome.
Let me move to Dr. Asma. Please, Dr. Asma. First, what do you think of what has been said by Dr. Mohammed Zagoud? And my question is, to what extent does the advancement of technology affect the set of tools that we, translation teachers, trainees, and translators deem essential? Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Actually, what Dr. Mohammed has just said is very important because let's be realistic. The increasing globalization of world trade and international relations led to what we know as the mechanization of translation process. And that's why we have machine translation tools such as Google Translate, and we also have many tools that have been developed, such as translation memory, terminology databases, language search engines, interactive machine translation, etc., etc. So this is the reality that we live in as translators, and this is the reality our students live in. So we cannot really ignore the technological advancement, its impact on the translation process, and also on the translation profession, which entails the same impact or effect on the way we train or teach translation. So it is very important, I think that translators or translation trainees, they need to be familiar with these tools. And eventually, these tools are the tools that the translators will need to use in their translation. So that being said, I keep going back to the effect of COVID-19 and how we, in a very short period of time, shifted globally our teaching evaluation means. So now we have been using online teaching for quite a long time, and we have tailored our aims, goals, outcomes based on this situation that we are in. I personally find that the technological aspect in teaching has its pros. So with that being said, technology is always important. It is the reality that we have been living in. It is the reality that we are living in. And I think it is the reality that we are going to live in the future as well. So I know most of us have been teaching online, and we cannot let go of some of the things that we have been enforced to use. For example, discussion board on the blackboard, I will definitely keep using that. So with this reality that we live in, technology is an integral, important part. And as I think Dr. Jamal said, he talked about the new needs of the market. So the needs of the market are not static, they are dynamic. With that, our students need to be dynamic. They need to learn the latest cutting edge technological advancement in the field of translation. So if we go back, let's say 20 years ago, when I was a student, I was not taught how to use CAT tools, but now I need to use it as a translator. So these are the things that we need to focus on as teachers. We need to basically help our students see the reality of translation practice that requires the translation technological tools, and hence the importance of these tools.
Thank you, Dr. Asma.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for sharing your hands-on experiences with us. Now back to Ms. Raya, please. Ms. Raya, according to your experience as a translation teacher for many years, and I think as a translator in particular, so according to your experience, I mean, when we translate from two different languages, in particular, those who are translating from two different languages which are linguistically and culturally distant, such as Arabic and English, should develop, this is my question, according to your experience, should develop what is called cultural sensitivity, also known as cultural awareness.
Yeah.
So first part, do you agree with me that those translators should develop this cultural sensitivity? Do you agree with me?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the second part of the question, just to make what I have in my mind clear, is this cultural awareness part of translation competence or not? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Ali, for this question. So the translator needs to have this cultural awareness. So it is part of translation competence. So when the translator have this cultural competence for both languages, so he has that ability to transfer from the ability to translate from the source language into the target language. So the translator, when he have this kind of competence, it means that he isn't just trying to find substitutions. Okay, for you know, some of the expressions will be expressed differently from the source language into the target language. So not just finding substitution, but trying to find suitable equivalents. As you know that there are some of words, some of expressions that are not translatable, and the translator needs to have this kind of competence, which is cultural competence. If he doesn't have this one, so it means that the text is produced is weak in sense. For example, let's say some of the proverbs, okay, some of the proverbs that are not translatable, or so the translator here, he needs to let's say he used strategies, the proper strategies or techniques to deal with such expression to fulfill the sense which is in the source language and transfer it into the target language. So as what I want to say as Dr. I think Dr. Muhammad. I think Dr. Muhammad mentioned this, that some of the translators, they are specialists in medical text. So those who are knowledgeable about medical text, they have that abilities to find or to do translation in medical text. So it's good that the translators try to translate different types of text in different disciplines, different subjects. So who will be more qualified in translation.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to add? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Raya, for uncovering your thoughts. Now, I would love to hear from you, all of you, please. But I will give each one 2 minutes, please, because of time. I would love to hear from you about how you teach translation and or interpreting in your classes. If you don't teach, you can imagine or you can rely on your past experience. So what are the main tools used and what are the main pieces of advice that you would like to share with us? Let me start with Dr. Alia. Dr. Alia, you have no more than 2 minutes.
Yeah, I usually teach by practice. I and use theory in as much as it is helpful in a practice. So I give them like texts of different types, different challenges, different translation problems. Sometimes we also consult published translation to see if the strategies used by the translator against the strategies used by the students. When teaching interpreting, we try to mock real life situations, like making the classroom like a mock conference. We use like also recordings by in real life situations where interpreters are working on the spot, and we make the students see the kind of situation the interpreter is going through. So in order to be aware of the work environment. When certain events take place in the university, we encourage our students to join these events as interpreters and translators in order to get some of the experience of the actual working place. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let me move to Dr. Mohammed Zagoud because I haven't seen Dr. Jamal. Dr. Mohammed Zagoud, yes, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ali, again. I just want to talk about a course that I'm teaching this semester. It's the only interpreting course that we have in our current program. We are working on an updated version of our program, but it's still under processing. The course that I'm teaching nowadays is called Community Interpreting. And because it's the main course in interpreting that we have in our program, I start by a theoretical part in which we talk about the definition, the modes of interpreting, the difference between translation and interpreting, the qualities and skills of the good interpreter, the interpreter ethics, and so on and so forth. Then we move to the second part of the course, which is a practical one, where we start practicing different types of interpreting. We start and we devote much of time to community interpreting in different settings, like at school, at the a court, at a medical setting, in different settings anyway. And we use a rubric for this, and the rubric consists of 5 categories. We assess students in each practical class according to their professionalism, how they behave professionally, based on their note-taking, based on their interaction and eye contact with the delegates or with the audience, based on the accuracy of language, and above all, based on interpreting accuracy. And at the end of the course, we calculate, for example, their scores and give them the grades accordingly. So this is in terms of community interpreting in our course.
Thank you. Thank you. They're good. Now let me move to Dr. Jamal, please. The floor is yours. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much again. Then concerning teaching translation for me, I'm sometimes teaching translation studies, sometimes teaching translation, sometimes teaching interpreting as well. I might consider myself for the moment a jack of all the trades. So teaching interpreting because I'm an interpreter, teaching translation because I'm a translator, official translator, and teaching translation studies because myself I'm conducting some research on translation, and accordingly I'm teaching translation studies as well. But regarding teaching translation, it depends on the level I'm teaching. If I'm teaching, let's say, advanced students, I do have a way to teach them. If I'm teaching novice, beginners students, so I do have another way as well. And if I'm teaching specialists in translation, I would have a way. And if I'm teaching others who are not specialists, let's say for instance, teaching translation for students of English or teaching translation for students of French, I would have another way. But generally speaking, when I teach translation, I focus on, at the very beginning, giving students the ability to understand that translation is not that mere automatic kind of lexical substitutions, changing bonjour with good morning with sabah al khair and full stop. This is not the whole story. So translation is all about context adaptation. Translation is about knowing the let's say some cultural backgrounds. Translation is about a message to be transmitted in a way or another one. If I manage to change, let's say, that kind of classical, traditional or routine definition given by let's say the observers, not specialists or practitioners, at that moment I would start teaching translation. Because if they don't get rid of this let's say cliché information, they will let's say practice translation in a way that I might consider a bit wrong. So if I enable students to understand that translation is this and this, and enable them to get rid of the classical meaning they got from the observers, at that moment I start teaching translation. Generally, I let's say make a kind of multiple reading to the text. The first thing I do is to undergo the lexical level of the text. That is to say, if there are any words which they are meeting for the first time, or words that are used in different contexts with different meanings, I need to break down first these words. Then I start collecting, let's say, ideas all together. This word plus this word, this sentence plus this sentence, this paragraph plus this paragraph, up till I arrive to the let's say the final phase, which is, or the final stage, sorry, which has to do with the stylistic amendments, changes, and so on. So let's say I start, let's say, step by step until the student starts, let's say, criticizing themselves and proofreading themselves, saying that you've committed, like, say, an I don't like to say a mistake, but you've committed, let's say, an imperfection. So I might see it from this angle, and the student at that moment starts, let's say, even proofreading themselves. This is how I generally do it. But regarding interpreting, I don't know if time allows me to speak about interpreting as well. Regarding interpreting, I would start first, depending on the type of interpreting, whether it's the consecutive or the simultaneous. If it is the consecutive, we have first to start teaching students note taking. If the student is able to make correctly note taken, at that moment we start teaching them consecutive interpreting. For simultaneous interpreting, we start all the time with that concentration exercises, that many concentration exercises, including, for instance, shadowing. That is to say, to repeat the same speech in the same language first. When you miss absolutely no word or no unit, at that moment we would say that the memory of the student is good, and at that moment we start to teach them interpreting. Generally, this is how I do it briefly. Thank you.
you, Dr. Jamal. What about you, Dr. Shabnam? Would you like to add?
Yeah, of course. Actually, in practical translation courses, I assign a text each week or the week after, depending on the course I'm teaching that semester, if it is commercial, literary, technical, or audiovisual translation. Then I ask the students to read their translations for every excerpt. I ask a number of them to volunteer to read their versions and justify their choices. And it would help them actually to understand there can be several versions of the same text and all of them are acceptable. And they would also discover subtle linguistic choices and the variation they could create in the tone and function of the text. Actually, in older school, there was this tendency that the teacher just read one text and said that this is the correct, accurate translation, and the students took notes. But these days, everything has changed, so we have to accept the variations in translation. And sometimes I allow them to lead the class, and I take on the role of the observer. And they comment on their classmates' translations, and if they have suggestions, offer them, justify them. And sometimes I divide them in groups to work together, discuss among themselves, revise and edit the text, and come up with a final revision. Maybe this is kind of training them for future to become translaborator, work in collaborative projects, because it's part of the translation career in future. So this teamwork is essential, in my opinion, to be a professional translator. And I also assign a term project to be submitted by the end of the semester. They choose a text themselves to translate. If it is literary translation, a shorter story. And then they also write a report about the objectives, the reason they selected this specific text, the text itself, its merits, its challenges. And by this, I also want to help them to practice time and project management, which are essential components in their career as a translator. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Dr. Asma? Please, 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali. I will be focusing in my answer on teaching translation, not interpreting. So basically, when I teach translation, I usually teach a large number of students. So let's say 80 students per section. So to be able to accommodate this number, I usually ask the students to choose their groups at the beginning of the term. So they get to choose who they want to work with. Because I won't be able to look at 80 texts every lecture. That's the first thing we do. Then we have weekly tasks where they can collaborate, work with their groups on these texts, and they submit these texts prior to the next lecture. I take 2 minutes to underline both negative and positive points that I find in each group's translation. And then on the day of the lecture, I show the students the text with the bits underlined, and then we have an open discussion about these underlined segments, whether they're positive or negative. And if they're negative or positive, based on what? Is it based on lexical choices, syntactic decisions, or stylistic decisions? Because sometimes the students, they just mirror the same length of sentences, which is obviously, if we look at the linguistic preferences between Arabic and English, we know that these are different. So usually Arabic sentences are longer, whereas English sentences are shorter, and so on and so forth. So that's when it comes to teaching translation. But the most important thing that so in addition to the group work, we also have individual projects and tasks, but I will not dwell on that at the moment. So the most important thing that I try to achieve in my classes is to develop their critical voice, the voice that each translator has in his or her head when we are translating. So I would like them to try and criticize themselves also, whether in a positive or a negative way, to have a constructive criticism while they're translating. And I see myself sometimes translating, and then I ask myself, why did I choose this instead of that? So this is the thing I try to aspire, or I aspire to achieve in my translation teaching methods. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Isma. What about you, Ms. Raya?
Yeah, actually for the way of teaching that here at Sahel University that we give 2 classes, lecture class and tutorial class, when we teach translation course. So each class is, let's say, lecture is 2 hours and tutorial is 2 hours. So in lecture class, we introduce the student into the subject. We give them theories regarding the subject. At the same time, I give them example sentences which are related to the subject. But in the tutorial class, that I give them more task sheets in that hard copy, and the student so they will so many questions or different types of questions are provided to the students, so they so at the beginning of the course they start translating sentences, so at the end of the course they will find themselves that they are translating a paragraph. This regarding this course, which is contrastive grammar in translation. So the student in the tutorial class, they will be asked to translate from English into Arabic or vice versa. So I always ask my student not just to stop with the tutorial and lecture class. At the same time, I upload some online tasks. Actually, we use the website of the university, which is called SULMS, and we start actually using this such online at the beginning of the pandemic of COVID-19. So we still it's continuing. We are using this way. So I upload many online tasks, and even I give them some references. So I advise them not just to stuck with the lecture and the tutorial class. They have to go and read more regarding the topic. This is the way of teaching the translation.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, our distinguished speakers. Now the time is for the questions of the attendees. Actually, we have a great number of attendees, more than 90. So thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks a lot for being patient with us. And with us also Dr. Khalid Shihari, who is Associate Professor of Translation Studies at Qatar University, and he wants to comment or ask a question. Can you hear me, Dr. Khalid?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much to all. I mean, thanks to all. And just it's a comment rather than a question here. I like the way that you addressed the concept of competences, and really, I mean, it's a wonderful discussion. I wish that you gave us more time, even the other guests, I mean, before, I mean, to talk about it. It's a very rich topic. But my point here, I noticed that we still, I mean, even if we think about competences, we're still looking at the competences or looking at translation from a traditional perspective, more than, even if we're talking about technologies, we still relate that to translating a text, translating words, the phrases, sentences. And I think we need to think further about that point. I mean, and Dr. Jamal gave hints to that. I mean, that we really need to look at the market and the demands of the market and what really, I mean, translation is now, rather just focusing on the classical thoughts about translation. But the point here is more about assessment. And I wish really, I mean, if there's any other workshop that you can arrange for assessment, because it's quite significant and important topic to talk about, more even important than competences. I mean, it's easy to talk about competences, but more challenging how to assess those competences. There was a question, yes, I know that, I mean, that to address that point, but again, very briefly. And I think assessment, one question here, if we need to assess competences, we need to look at the role of technologies as one category, one of 7 or one of 6 types of competences. But I noticed that some probably think about dictionaries, using dictionaries. No, that's not technologies. Thinking about translation memories. No, that's not technologies, actually. I mean, there are a lot of types of technologies that if we look at the market now, and if we look at the translator, how they work, we find that they spend most of the time not thinking about words or not translating text. It's more using tools. And when they receive a text, if we look at translation as a project rather than text, I think that will make it even clearer for us how to think about teaching our students, training them how to use technologies if we look at it as a project rather than as a text. Because in the project, you need to learn how to negotiate with the client. You need to learn how to invoice. You need to learn how to use dictionaries. You need to learn how to use Google Translate. Even in teaching, we have to teach them how to use Google Translate. We need to teach them how to use terminology databases and a lot of things, I mean, that we need to teach them. Now the question, when we assess that, I know that some lecturers using those technologies in teaching, but do they assess them? How they assess students? I mean, their students. I know until now, there are some programs, they use technologies, but they don't allow students to use dictionaries in exams, and which really, I mean, makes a big issue here. The other point, COVID-19. Actually, what I saw in COVID-19, it has nothing to do with the translation as a profession, or not really that effect. I mean, yes, it affected our way of teaching, but not how translators work, because the majority of translators work as freelance translators in the world. And they already using Trados, Mimikyu, and all of those technologies even before COVID-19. And the problem here in this region, probably, I mean, they don't focus really much about on technologies, on translation memories, and machine translation, on those technologies. When COVID-19 came, they started to think about it, although it was demanded long time before, and it's been like an issue for debate 10 years before COVID-19. So actually, COVID-19 helped us teachers how to change our style, but not the translators. The translators still, I mean, need to use to learn how to use technologies even before COVID-19. Probably now it's more challenging for us to teach technologies in COVID-19, because how to teach them those technologies if we are not there with the students in the same room, so we can monitor them, we can see their work on their computers. It's a bit difficult for us, I mean, as teachers. But there are a lot of things, I mean, really, I mean, and I wish, I mean, Dr. Ali, if you wanted to organize another workshop just for assessment, I mean,
yes,
assessing our students.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Yes, I will do. And thanks for your comment, and also,
I know.
Thanks for your suggestion that we need another workshop to talk about assessment rather than translation competence. I like the idea. Thanks a lot, Dr. Khalid. We have also Professor Faisal Maalij. I think he's from Saudi Arabia. I don't remember the name. He attended one of my lectures. Dr. Faisal?
Yes, can you
hear us? Yes, please, go ahead.
Is my microphone unmuted? Is it?
Yes, now we can hear you.
So I'd like to thank you very much indeed for accepting me to attend this lecture, this seminar. So I've got a couple of, 2 questions. You mentioned the course learning outcomes concerning interpreting and translation. Don't you think, I mean, my question is addressed to the panelists. Don't you think that the fact that we have some sort of dual focus in our translation departments all over the Arab world, this dual focus, academic and professional, may prevent us from elaborating, let's say, or designing specific market-oriented and consistent course learning outcomes? One question. The second one, I noticed that there is some I'm sorry for this term, over-eclectic view of the competence model. Don't you think that this might dilute our focus? Because, for example, Dorothy Kelly's somehow old model, 2005, contains elements about like procedure, bicultural, textual competence, communicative, instrumental. So don't you think that if you take a specific model and work within this model and then develop it, tailor it to our needs, don't you think that this is better than being over eclectic and taking everything from everywhere, and we end up with some contradictory views about competence?
Thank you, Dr. Faisal. Thanks a lot. Who wants to answer that question, please? Dr. Jamal, Dr. Alia, Dr. Muhammad, Dr. Isma.
Maybe I can take the first question.
Yeah, please.
Let's say I agree with him to a certain extent, and I would say that if you are speaking about the curricula, syllabi of translation, the problem, we are in the Arab world, and I think worldwide, we are suffering from one problem in translation, is that sometimes those designing curricula are not specialists, and I'm not speaking about not specialists, but not practitioners at least. So they studied, for instance, bachelor in translation, then master in translation, then after that a PhD in translation, but they have never translated. So in this case, I think they cannot know precisely, they cannot put their hands precisely on the needs of the market, on the practice itself, how it goes and how it works. And many others, mainly in interpreting. They are teaching interpreting and they have never interpreted in a conference. So if you design a syllabus for interpreters, most of the time, I would say you fail, but I would say because it's a teamwork, it's a collaborative work, I would say we might share ideas to try our maximum to let's say to have a better result. But I totally agree when it comes to those who are not specialists or not practitioners designing syllabus. So for me, I all the time let's say insist on those designing curricula for translation or interpreting must be at least practitioners from the field to know the needs, to know the circumstances, the conditions of the work, and so on, to enable having a curricula which fits, or curricula which fits the needs of the market. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal. Time is running out,
Dr.
unfortunately.
Ali,
Yes,
for
Dr.
the
Alia.
for the second question, yes,
Yeah.
I do agree that as I said, definitions of a translation competence tend to concentrate on this aspect and neglecting the other aspects. That's why I said that the PACTA group definition is an inclusive one, that it gives you like a blanket term for what translation definition is, and then you can take that definition and the components that are involved there, and you can tailor them in accordance with the needs of your translation course. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alia. Thanks a lot. And also we have Haytham Al-Suwailim, but unfortunately I cannot find your question. Can you talk? And also we have Muna here. Haytham Al-Suwailim, you said that you have a question, but I couldn't find your question because we received a lot of messages thanking you, the speakers, and also thanking the organizers of this webinar. Thanks a lot. If it seems that we have a lot of questions, but unfortunately time is running out. Now we come to the end of our webinar, and as you know, everything has to come to an end sometime. And we have to admit that ends are not always bad, but they just indicate that something that could be better, that could be good, is about to begin. And let me quote Frank Herbert here when he says, there is no real ending. It is just the place where we have to stop the story. So it is a story, and we have to stop this story, hoping we can meet over another story in the near future to discuss another topic related to translation studies. Wishing you all the best, and wishing you a bright and colorful future in which all your dreams come true. May you achieve everything that you want. And now let's go and conquer our dreams. Goodbye and take care.
Thank you.